This is the Minnesota Private College Hour. Bethel College presents Ideas in Focus. Tonight, Bethel College continues its series of Ideas in Focus, with special emphasis on some of the problems in the fields of science. The specific topic for conversation this evening is problems of culture. Your host for this program is Dr. Ivan Foz, Chairman of the Department of Sociology at Bethel.
Good evening. Tonight we are going to be discussing problems of culture with respect to one part of the world, the Auca culture in Ecuador, South America. And with me tonight is our guest, Mrs. Elisabeth Elliot, who spent time living with the Aucas and is here to help us react and reflect upon some of the problems that anyone faces when he is coming into a given culture. Ms. Elliot, welcome to Bethel. We've enjoyed having you at various functions on the campus this week.
Thank you, Larry.
Tonight, Betty, I would like to start with a series of questions. It's been 9 years since the event on the riverbank. Over these 9 years, what are the most common questions you were asked with respect to that experience?
Well, of course, people always want to know if there are any snakes in the jungle, and they want to know how old my daughter is, and they want to know if I've ever discovered why the men killed my husband.
Well, we better know the answers to those questions. Are there any snakes in Ecuador?
Yes, there are very deadly snakes, and far more than I anticipated.
And Valerie is?
10 years old.
And perhaps the more difficult question, why did they kill your husband?
I was able to get 2 of the Auca men themselves, who had part in the killing of the 5 missionaries, to make tape recordings for me, giving me play-by-play description of everything that happened. And it comes through quite clearly there that it was not very planned ahead of time, and the motive seems to have been that they believed the men to be cannibals. And so, to protect themselves and their way of life, they killed them.
That's interesting, Betty, because I was reading in a book called Man in the Primitive World, a statement by an anthropologist who was discussing wife hospitality. And he said the practice very aptly is called hospitality prostitution. And he said it's not a matter of misguided benevolence, but a necessary pledge that a guest is a friend and not an enemy. And then the anthropologist comments, this is evidently what caused the slaughter of American missionaries in Ecuador early in 1956 by the so-called Auca Indians. As your subsequent knowledge, I gather, has indicated that this was not so. Is this right?
Yes, it would have been impossible for anybody at that date to have determined what was the reason And it rather surprises me that anyone would make a statement like that when there could be no possible basis for judgment. But I think it was in 1959 that I first learned from these men that they thought that all outsiders were cannibals, not just white men, but anyone that they hadn't seen before. Where this idea came from, we were never able to discover. It's possible that back in the days of gold and oil and rubber hunters, some atrocities may have been committed against the Aucas, which they interpreted as the overtures of cannibalism. We have no way of knowing, but the Aucas themselves are not cannibals, nor are there any cannibals in Ecuador.
Another explanation, I guess, that everybody who has looked at this situation has tried to find explanations, and taking one of those, the belief that Indians in the area felt that large birds were the incarnation of evil spirits. How do you react to that? Does this seem reasonable, or what have you learned?
Well, it's interesting because there was only one occasion when I was able to learn anything about evil spirits from the Aucas, with the exception of their general statement that, yes, there are evil spirits, because having worked among the Quichuas and knowing that they believed that the jungle was full of them, I asked the Aucas if they had spirits, and they said yes, and I said, do you ever see them? And they said, once in a while, and I said, what do they look like? And they said, well, they look like any other evil spirits. And
that wasn't a very helpful response.
No, it wasn't. And they said they hear them. I said, what do they sound like? Well, they sound like any other evil spirits. That was the closest answer I could come to. But there was one day when I was sitting in my house and looked down on the bank and saw a large bird with long legs, some sort of a wading bird. I'd never seen anything quite like it in the jungle before, and while I was sitting looking at it, two of the Auca women came sneaking through my hut and said, shut up, there's an evil spirit. And I said, you mean that bird? And they said, yes, be quiet. I said, what are you going to do? And they said, we're going to chase it away. I said, wouldn't you want to kill it? And they said, oh no, we wouldn't kill an evil spirit. And they threw stones at it and sent it flapping away. And that's all I know about that. The idea that possibly the Aucas took the airplane to be an evil spirit of some kind has no foundation that I was able to discover. They were not particularly afraid of the plane itself, but they did think that possibly, unless they destroyed it, it would fly back by itself and inform on them.
I see.
So for this reason, they stripped off the fabric so that it wouldn't be able to fly.
I see. Betty, many people have looked at that incident and attempted explanations, anthropological, theological explanations for that event. How do you feel about people who attempt to explain the penetration of the culture?
Well, you certainly can't go about explaining it unless you have some data to work on, and I can understand quite easily why people would feel that the 5 men were misguided in going in there and probably ill-prepared, but these are not the facts of the case. They were, I think, quite well prepared. And, of course, it's understandable that people would make all manner of speculations, judging by other cultures, as to what the motivation for the killing was. But, as I've said, the only motivation that I was able to discover was that of cannibalism. As for the preparation that the 5 men made, I don't think anyone could do better than that. And certainly they did have every reason to believe that they'd won the confidence of the Aucas, since they were receiving gifts in return for theirs, and had had one friendly contact with 3 Aucas 2 days before they were killed.
Mm-hmm. Then you went back into the Auca culture. Was that 1961?
No, I went in 1958, October of 58.
And you lived there?
And I stayed there for 2 years.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I think it would be interesting just to talk about what the Aucas are like. You didn't know their language very well, I guess, when first you went in. Is this right?
No, I should say not. It's a very, very difficult language to learn, and I had practically nothing in the way of vocabulary when I arrived. 2 Auca women had come out of their tribe about a year before I went in, and I had persuaded them to come and live with me, and I'd spent that time trying to learn their language with, of course, no medium to work in, strictly a monolingual approach. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't gotten very far. One of them rarely talked at all. The other one talked sometimes with her mouth full, usually with her back turned, and she only had about 3 teeth. and refused to believe that I couldn't understand her. Both of them were assuming that I understood everything they said, so it made it doubly difficult. So by the time I went in to live with the Aucas, I knew next to nothing and spent the first year still struggling, trying to analyze and classify the data as I was able to write it down.
And you picked this up on cards, I understand, and some of the informants were more helpful in this than others.
Yes, I had notebooks, and I would write down whatever I could hear in the notebook in international phonetic characters. And then in the evenings, after the Aucas had gone to bed, I would file the data on 3x5 cards.
What was Auca culture like? What are the things that stand out about your own experience there? Were they the savages that the world has been led to believe?
Well, I would certainly say no. This was the first shock for me to find that these people that I had regarded as savage and bloodthirsty were actually some of the easiest Indians to get along with that I'd ever seen. They were kind to me the very first night we got there. They gave Valerie and me a little house to live in. They brought us wood for the fire and water and meat and fish to eat. In other words, they gave us everything they had. Mm-hmm. And when you say what is Auca culture like, I would say that the most succinct description I can think of is simple. They were naked. They were healthy. They didn't need medicines. They didn't need clothing. They didn't need foods. They were well nourished. They had everything they needed in their houses. And I found myself in a unique position as missionaries go, because in most situations missionaries are at least able to offer the people something in the material area that they want, and this was not the case among the Aucas. I had nothing to offer them, with the possible exception of knives. They were interested in knives, but most of them had them. But life was very simple, and it was a very illuminating experience for me to attempt to identify with them and live there. And it's gratifying to know that it's possible to get along with so little. We had no furniture in our house, just a hammock. And of course, our food that first year was very simple too. We ate what the Aucas ate, plus a few things that were dropped from the airplane, such as salt. The Aucas had never heard of salt.
They didn't want the salt?
No.
That's really living very simply, I would say.
Yes,
do you have any explanation for that? Just that they didn't?
Well, they were not familiar with salt, so they had no craving for it. Mm-hmm. I found that most of them enjoyed it when they tried it, which is not the case with sugar. They did not enjoy sugar. But I would say that most of them enjoyed salt, but they didn't seem to feel any need for it, and this was a surprise to me, of course, because I had believed that human beings must have salt.
What about their religious systems, Betty? Don't most cultures in the world have a religious system?
Yes, this is another area in which I think the Aucas are very unusual. I looked for evidence of religion for the whole first year that I was there and could see nothing that you could call the practice of religion. The Aucas did believe in a God. They had a word for God who created the world and made men, and as far as I could discover, that was about the extent of their belief. They did nothing about God, so in this sense it could be said that they had no form or practice of religion.
No worship?
They had no idea of worship, prayer, sacrifice, placating spirits, or anything of that nature. And so when I came back to the States after that first year, I was able to arrange an interview with Dr. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, in order to learn from her if there were areas that perhaps I hadn't explored in which I might discover the existence of religion. And she asked me questions about the Aucas and said that although her field, of course, was the South Pacific and she didn't know much about Latin America, that she had heard from some of her colleagues that there were a few tribes in the Amazon basin that had no religion. And when she asked me questions, then she said, well, I think probably you're right. It sounds as though they have no religion. But one thing that was very interesting to me, and I'm not at all sure I know what she means by it, she said that the Aucas are not a primitive people. when she asked me what sort of artifacts they make and I described them, she said, well, these are people who have had a developed culture and have either run away from it or have lost it, had it taken away from them. And so they're not really primitive. I don't know whether the world has any primitive peoples left if the Aucas aren't.
Now that's a question for the anthropologist to puzzle over more and more. You lived in a house which the Aucas provided for you. What was that like?
Well, that was very simple. 6 poles with a thatch roof. No floor, no walls, no furniture, no privacy.
And where were the other Aucas?
They had similar houses close to mine. In fact, the roof of one of their houses touched the roof of mine, so that it was like they being in the dining room and I being in the living room, something like that. I was able to see what went on in their house all day and all night, and vice versa.
How did you find life inside the Auca home?
Well, this was another thing that surprised me, the discovery that a harmony existed between them that I have never seen demonstrated in this country. I never saw any arguments, any signs of friction or disharmony between any of them, adults or children.
You mean kids not fighting with kids?
Kids didn't fight.
That's quite remarkable. Do you have any explanation for this, or?
No, I'm not a psychologist. I guess that their psychology was very simple compared to ours, and certainly life doesn't have the complexities that it has in this country. But what the explanation is, I really don't know. I read not long ago an article by a man who had lived with 22 different tribes in the Amazon basin, and he made the same observation, that he had never seen fighting among children in any of these tribes.
That's quite remarkable. Betty, let's turn the conversation a little bit to your writing. You have written 3 books, Through Gates of Splendor, the account of the Auca martyrdom, Shadow of the Almighty, a diary of your husband Jim, and then The Savage, My Kinsman, a pictorial documentation of your experience with the Aucas. I understand you're writing another book. What is this going to be like?
Well, this is very different, Ivan. I'm working on a novel and finding it far tougher than the first 3 books. But it's a novel about a missionary in Ecuador, and of course there are parts that will be autobiographical, but I have the latitude that I need in the novel form, which I would not have if it were exclusively autobiographical. It'll be up to the reader to try to figure out which part is and which part isn't. But I am trying to make a real novel, a true novel, in the sense of it's being an exploration of a human soul. I'm trying to depict what it really feels like to be a missionary and to scour the innermost depths of this experience, of the conflicts that arise in the missionary herself and in the gradual, I don't like to call it disillusionment, but I can't think of a better word offhand, perhaps the sobering of her estimate of what she's capable of doing among the mountain Quichuas of Ecuador, and to take a clear-eyed and yet compassionate look at this experience and attempt to evaluate it. It remains to be seen whether I've succeeded.
That would be different. The 3 books which you wrote were documentary, and now this is fiction. Have you had to do any adjustment in your approach to writing? Have you found it tougher?
Yes, very, very much more difficult.
And I'm remembering now something about novels as their attempt to provide some kind of universal truth. What universal truth are you hoping to promote?
Well, I think that the function of any true novel is to explore the human situation, and if it's a true novel, then it will be universal. And although, of course, the experience of this missionary is confined to a very limited area, and it is quite different from the experience of, say, a person in the United States, I hope that I'm portraying her as a human being, and therefore the truth which I attempt to elucidate is truth for all of us.
You said the latitude you need is given to you in writing this novel. You feel that there's something that needs to be said. Is this related to the rather high estimate which most people have toward the missionary as some kind of special person who is this high level of abstraction? Are you hoping to be able to make him more human as a person then?
Yes, of course. I think that it's very important that people realize that missionaries are human. I'm not in any sense trying to expose missionaries any more than any true novel attempts to expose the human race. I think this is what a true novel does. It exposes us and strips away the veneers, the superficialities, and gives us a mirror in which we can see ourselves. And if I can do this through the personality of a missionary, then I will feel that I've accomplished my end. Mm-hmm. Insofar as missionaries have regarded themselves as a special breed and been regarded by their constituency as a special breed, this is false. Mm-hmm. And I would certainly hope to be able to shake that idea.
Actually, Betty, you're not a missionary now, is that right?
That's right. I'm back in the States and have no plans for returning to Ecuador.
Your ministry is really writing, is that correct?
Yes.
Uh-huh. And all of us are greatly benefited by it. Perhaps we might ask just a very simple question about where the other wives are, what they're doing, and perhaps what their plans are. Let's see, there was Mary Lou McCulley.
She lives in Seattle. She works in a hospital, and she has 3 sons. Marge Saint is still in Ecuador. She works with radio station HCJB. Actually, she's working with the hospital in connection with that station. She also has 3 children. Olive Fleming was married a number of years ago. She's now Mrs. Walter Liefeld and lives near Chicago. Her husband's a college professor. And Barbara Udarian is on furlough from her missionary work in Ecuador, and so far as I know, will be returning to Ecuador.
Mm-hmm. Your daughter Valerie went back with you into Auca culture, and she was just an infant on the occasion of the martyrdom. Bring us up to date on her.
Well, as I said, she's 10 years old, and she's going to public school in New Hampshire. She's in the 5th grade.
Do you feel that her experience in Ecuadorian culture was valuable for her personally?
I don't think there's any question but what it was valuable. Just how I could define the value at this point, I don't know. But I was always grateful for the simplicity of life there and the fact that she was able to adjust to it as children can. And that she has this experience to remember. When we left the Auca, she was about 7, and she was 8 and a half when we left Ecuador, so her memories are still quite clear of what the jungle is like. She doesn't really make much of it now. Her playmates hardly know that she's ever been out of this country. I think children don't like to be different, so she doesn't really try to capitalize on this experience.
She apparently fitted right in the Auca culture. Some of the pictures that we saw at the beginning of the program showed her piggyback one occasion and falling asleep on the other. I suppose this is a part of being a child. Does she talk about the Auca culture as some place that was pleasant for her?
Yes, the main thing she misses is the river. We had a river right by the front door, and she could swim there 6 or 7 hours a day, so that's quite different now in New Hampshire. But I don't think there's very much else that she misses about it. The freedom, of course, to be able to do what she wanted most of the day was something that she misses now. And of course, having to go to school takes a good bit more time in the public school than it did by correspondence. I taught her her first 3 years of school by correspondence course, and she was usually able to finish the work in 3 or 4 hours at the most.
We have a lot of comments made about how children who are brought up in other cultures are deprived of educational opportunities and so on. Do you think this is true for Valerie? Do you think she was disadvantaged educationally?
Not appreciably in those first 3 years, but I would have felt that she was if I had stayed there much longer. That's the reason I came to the States, because I felt she needed to be with other children.
Mm-hmm. Betty, let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the way that the public press has accepted or written up the Auca martyrdom. Do you think that they have been fair? Do you think they have been overly sensational? How would you comment about this?
I think that, for the most part, the secular press has been very fair, and they have made an honest attempt to discover the facts. I've been disappointed to find that the religious press has not always met that same standard. They have had their own axes to grind and have used the Auca affair for their own ends at times, and this has been very disturbing to me.
I would be interested in how you feel about the religious press and other persons of religious motivations attempting to defend God in a situation like this. Is this one of the errors that the press fell into, the religious press?
Yes, I feel that whenever something happens in life that we can't explain by means of our usual categories, Christians become convinced that they've got to rush to God's defense. And God is far bigger than that. He doesn't need our defense.
So I expect we could say that a mistake with a capital M was not made then when the 5 men penetrated Auca culture.
That's right.
Well, this has been a very illuminating conversation. Is there anything that comes to your mind, Betty, that maybe you're just hoping to say in our conversation together about your books, about Auca culture, about a Christian's response to it?
No, I think we've covered the ground fairly well.
Well, thank you very much. It is quite an experience to discuss openly and candidly the implications of an issue which the world regarded in large measure as an injustice. This evening we have been discussing with Mrs. Elisabeth Elliot a number of the problems connected with culture penetration. As has been evident, I think, we have not produced any simple explanations, but if we've been able to stimulate your thinking, then we are satisfied to say that our visit has been worthwhile. Thank you for being with us, and good evening.
Next Tuesday at 8:30, Bethel College invites you to join Dr. Walford Peterson when he will present a program dealing with some of the values in our society. Bethel College is one of the 15 private liberal arts colleges in the Minnesota Private College Council.